All right, in this video, I'm going to be mounting the heads to the camshaft towers. A little bit different approach than the traditional approach. You can go ahead and research for yourself. There's pros and cons to taking the approach that I took here versus the traditional approach of mounting the heads to the cylinders first and then the cam towers on top. Okay, so here's a quick shot of the finished product. So what you'll be left with taking this approach is essentially two banks of heads, right? So you've got the left-hand side and the right-hand side, as you can see here. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. As usual, you want to start by cleaning the surfaces. So I'm just using typical rubbing alcohol and these Kimtech wipes to wipe down and clean all of these flat surfaces where the heads are going to mount to these camshaft towers. You want to make sure everything is nice and clean. Now it's time to clean the mounting surfaces on the heads themselves. Again, just using your typical rubbing alcohol and Kimtech wipes. Just want to make sure everything is just spotless, where these two surfaces are going to meet with one another. My heads were pretty clean, as with everything else that came back from the machine shop. But as you can see, I actually went over the surfaces at least a couple times. I just wanted to make sure that the Loctite that I'm going to be applying to these surfaces had a chance to stick really, really well. All right, once you've made sure that the mating surfaces of both the heads and the camshaft towers are 100% clean, you can start to apply the Loctite 574 to the surface. You want to apply fairly thick bead. If you look in the video, you can see the area where the Loctite needs to be applied. Do not apply it to the heads. Apply it to the surface of the camshaft tower only. Once you've gotten a pretty liberal amount on there, go ahead and use an acid brush and spread it evenly across the surface. While you're doing that, you want to look for any lost bristles that maybe have fallen out of the brush. It's important that this part of the process is done thoroughly, because this is going to help prevent oil leaks in your motor. As you can see, as I started to spread out the Loctite 574 with the acid brush, I was noticing some areas that were fairly thin and we're going to require additional Loctite. So don't be afraid, grab the Loctite, apply some more, and then spread it out using your brush. You want to make sure that you've got a nice, even cover across the mounting surface. Okay, so once you're happy with the coverage of the Loctite 574 on the camshaft towers, it's time to mount the heads. It's pretty simple. You want to grab the heads. Make sure that you're identifying the dowel pins that are located inside the heads, because that's really what you want to use to line up and mate with the camshaft housings themselves. You may have to jiggle the heads slightly just to get it to fit, but it should fit right on. So I was able to pretty gently just flip over this bank of heads. You know, you want to basically keep it to where the heads don't pull away from the Loctite. Just flip it over. I already had all the hardware ready to go, so I quickly started putting the washers and nuts in the places they needed to go. So this requires 15 M8 13 millimeter nuts and 3 M8 8 millimeter barrel nuts. So go ahead and, you want to use the appropriate washers and nuts and put them on hand tight. All right, so all of these nuts need to be tightened down to 18.4 foot-pounds of torque, and that will be accomplished by using a crisscross pattern and also going about 75% of the way through the first pass-through, and then get down to, to the final torque setting, with your second pass. One thing to remember is, these head bolts will need to be checked and retorqued after your motor is going through the early break-in stages. There is a recommended pattern to this crisscross pattern that you can see me using. So take a look at where I'm starting and where I'm finishing to get a sense of what that crisscross pattern should be. All right, so here's a couple shots of the finished product. You know, I obviously repeated the process that I shared, you know, for covering the other half of the engine. So happy with the way things came out. You know, everything in this motor is obviously beautifully clean right now. Everything just fresh back from the machine shop. It is an MFI motor, so you can see, you know, my MFI heads here. It's also been ported and polished. So these heads are now basically at RS specs, so 36 millimeter intake, 35 millimeter exhaust, including some beautiful polishing work by Ollie's. So they look pretty. All right, so with these head banks fully assembled, I wanted to go ahead and make sure that I tested out you know, the camshafts. Wanted to make sure that they were able to slide into the housings and spin freely. So that's important. Want to make sure that they spun freely. They're not catching anywhere, because that could be evidence that maybe you know, the heads were not torqued down evenly or appropriately. So you want no binding. So just quickly, you know, lubed up the camshaft housings and the camshaft lobes themselves pretty liberally with assembly oil, and slid the camshaft into the housing and gave it a spin, and everything felt perfect. Just to remind everyone, this is not the traditional way to build a 911 motor. You know, typically you would not mount the camshaft towers to the heads until the heads were mounted to the cylinders. I did this for a couple reasons, really mainly because my cylinders, I went with Ellen Nicky's cylinders, were taking some time to get to me. And you know, with my project, you know, I was trying to use my time as best as I could. Essentially, I was building this motor in parallel to my car having the sheet metal and paint work done, and I really was trying to make sure when that car came back, it was ready to be reassembled. So anyway, so I took a little bit of a chance here, took an untraditional approach to this. I did quite a bit of research though, reached out to some other motor builders, spent some time in the forums, and it doesn't sound as though this is that uncommon. And this, in particular, having all of my machine work done by Ollie's, I was very confident in the quality of the machining, so I felt it was okay to push forward with this approach. One final comment that I will share is it makes for some heavy lifting. You know, later when I have videos showing me mounting these banks onto the motor, you know, it's obviously quite a bit heavier to lift and mount to the motor, so keep that in mind. You know, some heavy lifting there makes it for a little bit, you know, a little awkward in terms of finding the position to put these onto the motor. Next up, I'll be installing the pistons and cylinders.